Black woman defended a Hell's Angel from police. 24 hours later, 320 bikers surrounded her diner. The sound of leather boots hitting concrete echoed through the night as Denise Carter stepped into what would become the most dangerous 24 hours of her life. Blood pooled beneath the streetlight in her diner's parking lot, and the man they were beating wasn't moving anymore. Hey, beautiful souls. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having an amazing day wherever you're watching from. Drop a comment and let me know what city or country you're tuning in from. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, because today's story is going to take you on an emotional roller coaster that you absolutely won't want to miss. Trust me, you'll want to be part of this incredible community we're building together. The neon sign of Carter's Diner flickered against the October darkness, casting eerie shadows across the cracked asphalt where two police officers stood over a massive figure in blood-soaked leather. Denise's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched through the kitchen window, her hands still wet from washing the last of the dinner dishes. She'd been about to lock up, count the till, and head upstairs to her small apartment above the diner when the violence erupted just outside her door. The bigger cop, Officer Reynolds, she recognized him from his weekly coffee and pie routine, raised his baton again. The leather-clad man on the ground tried to shield his head with arms that looked like tree trunks, but he was losing consciousness fast. Blood streamed from a gash above his left eye, mixing with the rain that had started to fall. "Please," the man gasped, his voice barely audible through the glass. I didn't." Reynolds brought the baton down anyway. Something snapped inside Denise Carter. Maybe it was the memory of her late husband Jerome, who died in police custody 3 years ago under circumstances that were never fully explained. Maybe it was the sight of another human being getting beaten while helpless. Or maybe it was just the simple fact that she'd spent 43 years watching injustice happen and doing nothing about it. Not tonight. The bell above her diner door chimed as she pushed through it, the sound almost musical against the backdrop of violence. Both officers turned toward her, their faces twisted with adrenaline and something darker. The man on the ground, she could see now that he was enormous, probably 6'4" and built like a linebacker, lifted his head just enough to look at her through swollen eyes. "Ma'am, get back inside," Officer Reynolds barked, not lowering his weapon. "This is police business." Denise's voice came out steadier than she felt. "This is my parking lot." She took another step forward, her sneakers splashing through a puddle mixed with rainwater and blood. The second officer, younger, nervous, his nameplate reading Martinez, shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, this man is a dangerous criminal," Martinez said, trying to sound authoritative but failing. "He's a member of a motorcycle gang. We're making an arrest." "Looks like you're making a murder," Denise replied, her dark eyes flashing. She moved closer, close enough now to see the intricate tattoos covering the fallen man's massive arms, close enough to see the Hell's Angels patch on his leather vest, close enough to see that he was barely breathing. Reynolds stepped toward her, his face flushed with rage. "Lady, I'm warning you. Interfere with police business, and you'll be joining him on the ground." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Denise felt her knees shake, felt every instinct screaming at her to retreat to the safety of her diner, to mind her own business like she'd done for so many years. But then the man on the ground made a sound, a wet, rattling breath that reminded her of Jerome's last moments in that hospital bed, tubes down his throat, machines beeping their electronic funeral song. She planted her feet and crossed her arms. "Then you better call another ambulance." What happened next would change everything. What happened next would bring 320 leather-clad riders to her doorstep. What happened next would force Denise Carter to discover just how much courage lived inside her heart, and whether that courage would save her life or end it. But first, she had to survive the next 5 minutes. Reynolds raised his baton toward her, his eyes cold as winter steel. "Last warning, lady." The man on the ground whispered something that made both officers freeze. A single word that would echo through the next 24 hours like thunder. Grizzly. What did that name mean? Why did 2 seasoned cops suddenly look terrified? And what was Denise Carter about to unleash on her quiet Midwestern town? The name, Grizzly, hung in the air like a death sentence. Officer Reynolds' baton trembled in his grip, and Martinez actually took a step backward, his hand moving instinctively toward his radio. But it was too late to call for backup now. Denise Carter had already made her choice. I said get back inside, Reynolds hissed, but his voice had lost its commanding edge. Fear had crept in, and Denise could smell it on him like cheap cologne. She knelt beside the massive man, her knees hitting the wet asphalt with a soft splash. Up close, she could see the intricate details of his injuries, a split lip, a nose that might be broken, and that gash above his eye that wouldn't stop bleeding. But she could also see something else, intelligence in those dark eyes, and a kind of desperate gratitude that made her chest tight. "What's your real name?" she asked softly, pulling a clean dish rag from her apron pocket and pressing it gently against the worst of the bleeding. "Thomas," he whispered, his voice like gravel. "Thomas Corleone." The irony wasn't lost on her. A man with the last name of movie royalty, beaten bloody in a diner parking lot. "Well, Thomas, I'm Denise. And these officers are about to explain why they were trying to kill you in my parking lot." Reynolds stepped closer, his shadow falling across them both. "Ma'am, you don't understand what you're dealing with. This man is the vice president of the Devil's Disciples chapter. He's wanted in connection with..." "With what?" Denise interrupted, her voice sharp. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you two were beating an unarmed man half to death." Thomas tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his ribs. Wasn't resisting, he managed. Was just getting coffee. Denise looked toward her diner, where a large coffee cup sat abandoned on the hood of a massive Harley-Davidson. The bike was pristine, all chrome and black leather, with enough custom work to cost more than most people's cars. But it was parked neatly between the lines, and there was no sign of any disturbance except for the violence the officers had brought. "He's lying," Martinez said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We got a call about a disturbance." "From who?" Denise demanded. The officers exchanged glances. Reynolds' jaw worked like he was chewing glass. "Anonymous tip." Denise had run Carter's diner for 8 years. Ever since Jerome's death had left her with nothing but insurance money and a desperate need to start over somewhere new. She'd chosen this small Indiana town, Millbrook, because it was quiet, because people minded their own business, and because the rent was cheap enough for a widow with more determination than capital. In those 8 years, she'd learned to read people. The truckers who stopped for a famous apple pie and black coffee. The factory workers who came in for breakfast before their shifts. The teenagers who pooled their money for milkshakes and French fries. The lonely elderly folks who made a single cup of coffee last 2 hours just for the company. She'd also learned to read the local cops. Reynolds was a bully who got off on his badge. Martinez was young and trying to prove himself. Neither of them was the type to respond to anonymous tips about coffee purchases. "You know what I think?" Denise said, helping Thomas lean against the wheel of his bike. "I think you two saw a black woman serving a biker and decided to send a message." The words hit like a slap. Reynolds' face went red, and his grip tightened on the baton. "You're way out of line, lady." "Am I?" Denise stood up, all 5'6" of her facing down 2 armed men. "Because I've been serving coffee to truckers, bikers, and everyone else for 8 years, and this is the first time anyone's gotten beaten bloody for it." Thomas reached up and touched her arm gently. Despite his size and the fearsome patches on his vest, his touch was surprisingly gentle. "Denise," he said quietly, "you should go inside. This is going to get complicated." She looked down at him, this giant of a man with the soft eyes and the dangerous reputation, and felt something shift in her chest. It wasn't attraction, not exactly. It was recognition. She saw in Thomas Corleone the same thing she'd seen in Jerome during their 20-year marriage. A good man trying to survive in a world that had already decided he was the enemy. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. That's when they heard it, the distant rumble of motorcycle engines, still miles away but getting closer. Thomas closed his eyes and sighed deeply. "What's that sound?" Martinez asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Thomas opened his eyes and looked directly at Denise. "That," he said quietly, "is my family coming to find me." Reynolds grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. We need backup at Carter's Diner on Route 9. Multiple motorcycles approaching. Possible gang activity." The radio crackled back. "Unit 47, backup is 20 minutes out. Advise you to maintain safe distance and avoid escalation." 20 minutes. Denise looked at Thomas, then at the two officers who were now scanning the horizon nervously. The rumble was getting louder. "How many?" she asked Thomas. He managed a weak smile that transformed his battered face completely. "Depends on how worried they are. Could be 20. Could be 200. Reynolds was backing toward his patrol car now, dragging Martinez with him. "Ma'am, I strongly advise you to lock your doors and stay inside until this is resolved." But Denise Carter had spent 3 years wondering what would have happened if someone, anyone, had stood up for Jerome when he needed it most. She'd spent 8 years building a life based on serving others, on creating a safe space where people could find comfort and community. She wasn't about to abandon that now. "Thomas," she said, helping him to his feet. "Can you walk?" He nodded, though she could see the effort it cost him. "Why are you helping me?" The question hung between them as the sound of approaching motorcycles grew louder. In the distance, Denise could see headlights, dozens of them, maybe more. "Because," she said simply, "it's the right thing to do." What she didn't know was that Thomas Corleone had spent 15 years in the Hells Angels, had seen violence and loyalty and brotherhood that most people couldn't imagine. But he'd never seen anything like the courage of a small-town diner owner willing to risk everything for a stranger. What she didn't know was that the approaching riders weren't just coming to check on their vice president. They were coming to meet the woman who had stood between their brother and death itself. What she didn't know was that in the next 24 hours, her quiet life in Millbrook, Indiana, was about to become the center of a story that would change everything she thought she knew about family, loyalty, and love. The rumble was getting closer, much closer, and Denise Carter was about to discover that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't just change your life, it changes you completely. The first motorcycle crested the hill like a mechanical thunderbolt, its single headlight cutting through the darkness. Then came another, and another. Within minutes, the quiet country road leading to Carter's diner had transformed into a river of chrome and leather, the rumble of engines so loud that Denise could feel it in her bones. Thomas straightened against his bike, wincing, but managing to stand taller. Despite his injuries, there was something almost regal about the way he carried himself as his brothers approached. "Denise," he said quietly, "whatever happens next, stay close to me." Officer Reynolds was shouting into his radio now, his voice cracking with panic. "Dispatch, we have approximately 50 motorcycles converging on our location. Where's that backup?" 50. Thomas managed a laugh that turned into a cough. "Reynolds, you can't count for shit." Denise looked toward the approaching convoy and felt her heart skip. Thomas was right. There were far more than 50 bikes. The headlights stretched back along the highway like a constellation fallen to earth, and they were all heading straight for her diner. The lead bike roared into the parking lot, its rider a mountain of man who made even Thomas look small. He killed the engine and swung off the bike in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the asphalt with authority. The patch on his vest read "President" in bold letters, and beneath it, a name that made Officer Martinez visibly pale. Steele. Steele Malone surveyed the scene with cold blue eyes. Thomas bloodied and leaning against his bike, Denise standing protectively beside him, and 2 cops who looked like they were about to wet themselves. More bikes poured into the parking lot behind him, their riders dismounting with military precision. "Tommy," Steele said, his voice carrying easily over the rumble of still-arriving motorcycles. "You look like hell." "Feel worse," Thomas replied, but there was warmth in his voice. "Steele, meet Denise Carter. She owns this place, and she just saved my life." Steele's gaze shifted to Denise, and she felt like she was being evaluated by a predator. He was probably in his 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail and scars that told stories she probably didn't want to hear. But when he looked at her, something unexpected flickered in those cold eyes. Respect. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of an imaginary hat. "I'm Steele Malone, and it appears I owe you a debt." More bikes continued to arrive, 20, 30, 40. Denise lost count as the parking lot filled with leather-clad riders, their machines arranged in perfect formation around the diner. The air smelled of gasoline and exhaust, and the sound was overwhelming. But there was something almost ceremonial about the way they positioned themselves. Officer Reynolds found his voice. "This is an illegal assembly. I'm ordering all of you to disperse immediately." Steele turned toward the officer with the slow, deliberate movement, a man who had never been afraid of anything in his life. "Officer Reynolds," he said pleasantly. "I believe you know my lawyer, Marcus Rothschild?" Reynolds' face went white. Everyone in 3 counties knew Marcus Rothschild, the defense attorney who had made a career out of making cops look like fools in court. "We're not here to cause trouble," Steele continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the parking lot. "We're here to check on our brother and thank the lady who helped him." "Your brother is a criminal," Martinez shouted, trying to sound braver than he looked. The temperature in the parking lot seemed to drop 10 degrees. Every single rider turned toward Martinez with expressions that could have frozen hell. Steele held up one hand, and the subtle movement was enough to keep 40-plus bikers from advancing on the young officer. "Officer Martinez," Steele said quietly, "I'd suggest you choose your next words very carefully." Thomas pushed himself away from his bike, swaying slightly, but managing to stand on his own. "Steele, they were beating me unconscious when Denise stepped in. No warrant, no arrest, just fists and batons." "Is that so?" Steele's voice was silk over steel. "And what was the probable cause for this interaction?" Reynolds was sweating now despite the cool October air. "We received a report of suspicious activity." "Suspicious activity," Steele repeated, like ordering coffee. That's when Denise noticed something that made her blood run cold. More motorcycles were still arriving, but these weren't just from one chapter. She could see different patches, different colors. Word had spread beyond Thomas's immediate family. "How many chapters?" she whispered to Thomas. He followed her gaze, and his expression grew serious. "Looks like Jesus." "Steele, how many clubs did you call?" Steele's smile was sharp as a blade. "Word travels fast when someone messes with family, Tommy. Especially when that someone wears a badge." A new bike roared into the lot. A massive touring bike with enough chrome to blind someone. The rider who dismounted was a woman, tall and lean with silver hair braided down her back. The patch on her vest read, "Road Captain," and her name was Phoenix. Phoenix Capone strode directly to Denise, ignoring the cops completely. "You're the one who stood up for Tommy." Denise nodded, suddenly feeling very small surrounded by all this leather and chrome and barely contained violence. Phoenix studied her for a long moment, then did something completely unexpected. She smiled, and her entire face transformed. "Sister, you've got more balls than half the men I know." "Language, Phoenix," Steele said mildly, but he was smiling too. "Sorry, boss." Phoenix turned back to Denise. "What I meant to say is, you've got more courage than most people could dream of." The parking lot was full now. Denise counted at least 60 bikes, maybe more. Riders from multiple chapters, all united by the simple fact that someone had tried to hurt one of their own. The display of loyalty was overwhelming, but it was also terrifying. "This is getting out of hand," she said quietly to Thomas. He nodded, his expression troubled. "Steele, maybe we should." "Ma'am." Officer Reynolds had approached them, his earlier bravado completely gone. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here." Steele laughed, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. "A misunderstanding? Is that what we're calling attempted murder now?" "Now see here," Reynolds started. "No, you see here." The voice came from behind them, and everyone turned to see a new arrival. This one wasn't on a motorcycle. He'd arrived in a black sedan that screamed federal government. The man who got out was tall, thin, and wearing a suit that probably cost more than Denise made in a month. "Agent Morrison, FBI," he announced, flashing his badge. "I need everyone to remain calm." The parking lot went dead silent, except for the tick of cooling engines. Agent Morrison surveyed the scene with professional detachment, his gaze lingering on the sheer number of motorcycles surrounding the small diner. "Mr. Malone," he said, addressing Steele directly, "this is quite a gathering." "Agent Morrison," Steele replied pleasantly. "Always a pleasure. Just checking on a friend." Morrison's eyes shifted to Thomas, taking in the blood and bruises. "Mr. Corleone, rough night." "You could say that." Morrison turned to Denise, and she felt like she was being x-rayed. "Miss Carter, I presume? I understand you witnessed the altercation." Denise looked around at the sea of leather-clad faces watching her, at the federal agent with his calculating eyes, at the local cops who looked like they wanted to disappear. 20 minutes ago, she'd been washing dishes and getting ready to close up for the night. Now she was standing in the middle of what looked like a potential war zone. I saw two officers beating an unarmed man, she said clearly. So I stopped them. Morrison nodded slowly. And now you find yourself in an interesting position, don't you? That's when Denise realized the true scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about Thomas getting beaten up. This wasn't just about local cops overstepping their authority. This was about something much bigger, much more dangerous. The FBI didn't show up for routine police brutality cases. They showed up when federal crimes were involved, when organized crime was involved, when things were about to spiral completely out of control. Agent Morrison, she said carefully, am I in some kind of trouble? Morrison's smile was thin and cold. Ms. Carter, I think trouble is exactly what you're in. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Behind him, more headlights appeared on the horizon. Not motorcycles this time, police cars. Lots of them. Steele saw them too. Tommy, he said quietly, I think our quiet little thank you visit just became something else entirely. Thomas moved closer to Denise, his presence both comforting and terrifying. Whatever happens, he said softly, I won't let them hurt you. But as the police cars crested the hill, at least a dozen of them, maybe more, Denise realized that Thomas might not have a choice. She'd stepped into something much bigger than a simple act of kindness, and now she was about to discover just how deep the rabbit hole went. The war she never asked for was about to begin, and she was standing right in the middle of it. The police cars spread across the highway like a blockade, their red and blue lights painting the night in violent colors. Denise counted 12 vehicles, state police, county sheriff, and what looked like a SWAT van bringing up the rear. The quiet country road had become a battlefield, and her diner sat right in the middle of no man's land. Well, Phoenix said dryly, this escalated quickly. Steele moved with calm precision, speaking quietly into a radio clipped to his vest. Within seconds, the bikers around them shifted positions, not aggressively, but with the practiced efficiency of people who knew how to handle confrontations. They formed a protective circle around Denise and Thomas, their bikes creating a barrier between them and the approaching law enforcement. Ms. Carter, Agent Morrison said, his voice cutting through the tension, I think it would be best if you went inside your establishment. I think it would be best if everyone just calmed down, Denise replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. This is my property, and I have a right to know what's happening here. Thomas touched her arm gently. Denise, he's right. This could get ugly fast. She looked up at him, this giant of a man with the gentle eyes and the dangerous friends, and felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't just attraction, though she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. It was something deeper, more complex. In the space of an hour, Thomas Corleone had become more than just a stranger she'd helped. He'd become someone she cared about protecting. I'm not leaving you out here, she said firmly. Steele overheard and turned toward them, his expression unreadable. Ma'am, with all due respect, you don't understand what you're dealing with. These aren't just local cops anymore. When the feds show up, things get complicated. How complicated? Denise asked. Before Steele could answer, a voice boomed across the parking lot through a police megaphone. This is Sheriff Davidson. I'm ordering all motorcycle club members to disperse immediately. You have 5 minutes to clear the area. Steele's laugh was sharp and humorless. 5 minutes? Davidson's got some balls, I'll give him that. Phoenix moved closer to Denise, her voice low and urgent. Honey, there's something you need to understand. Tommy isn't just any member of our club. He's our vice president, and he's also... She glanced at Thomas, who shook his head slightly. Well, let's just say he's important to a lot of people. What does that mean? Denise demanded. Thomas sighed heavily. It means I'm not just a biker, Denise. I'm also a mechanical engineer with a master's degree from Purdue. I design custom bikes for celebrities, politicians, even some federal judges. I've got friends in places that make some people very nervous. The revelation hit Denise like a physical blow. She'd assumed Thomas was just another rough biker, someone living on the margins of society. The reality was far more complex and far more dangerous. So when those cops were beating you, she began. They weren't just attacking a club member, Steele finished. They were attacking someone with connections that go all the way to Washington. Someone whose disappearance would be noticed by very powerful people. Agent Morrison approached their group, his expression grim. Mr. Malone, I need you to understand the situation here. We have reports of weapons, of potential violence. The local authorities are concerned about public safety. Whose weapons? Steele asked pointedly. Because I don't see any of my people carrying anything but their keys and wallets. Morrison's jaw tightened. Mr. Malone, don't play games with me. We both know what your organization is capable of. Our organization, Phoenix interjected, is capable of building custom motorcycles, raising money for children's charities, and protecting our family. What exactly are you accusing us of? The standoff was interrupted by the arrival of another vehicle, a news van from the regional television station. Then another. Within minutes, reporters and camera crews were setting up along the highway, their bright lights turning the scene into a media circus. Shit, Thomas muttered. This is the last thing we need. Denise watched the reporters with growing alarm. Why is this such a big story? Because, Agent Morrison said, overhearing her question, when 60-plus members of various motorcycle clubs converge on a small town, people pay attention, especially when federal agents are involved. Steele's radio crackled, and he listened intently before responding. When he finished, his expression was troubled. Tommy, we've got more chapters en route. Word spread about what happened, and they're not happy. How many more? Thomas asked. Could be another 100 bikes by morning. The number hit Denise like a sledgehammer. 100 more motorcycles? Her small town of Millbrook had a population of barely 3,000 people. The arrival of that many bikers would effectively double the population overnight. This is insane, she said, running her hands through her hair. All I did was stop 2 cops from beating someone to death. All you did, Phoenix said gently, was show more courage than most people have in their entire lives. In our world, that means something. Sheriff Davidson's voice boomed across the parking lot again. Final warning. Disperse immediately or face arrest for unlawful assembly. Steele keyed his radio. All units, maintain position. No one moves unless I give a word. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. 60 bikers faced off against a dozen police cars, with federal agents and news crews documenting every moment. And in the middle of it all stood Denise Carter, a widow who just wanted to run her diner in peace. That's when Thomas did something that surprised everyone. He stepped forward, away from the protective circle of his brothers, and walked toward the police line. Thomas, no, Denise called out, but he was already moving. Sheriff Davidson, Thomas called out, his voice carrying clearly across the parking lot. I'm Thomas Corleone. I believe you're looking for me. The sheriff emerged from behind his patrol car, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a mustache that had gone out of style 20 years ago. Mr. Corleone, you're under arrest for what? Thomas interrupted. For ordering coffee? For getting beaten half to death by your officers? Davidson's face reddened. For disturbing the peace? For... Sheriff. Agent Morrison's voice cut through the confrontation. Perhaps we should discuss this situation more privately. But Thomas wasn't finished. Sheriff, before you arrest me for anything, I think you should know that Ms. Carter's security cameras recorded the entire incident. Denise's eyes widened. She'd completely forgotten about the cameras Jerome had insisted on installing when they first bought the diner. They were old and not particularly high quality, but they covered the entire parking lot. The cameras, she said. Thomas nodded. I saw them when I parked. They've got a clear view of everything that happened. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Officer Reynolds went pale. Martinez looked like he was going to be sick, and Sheriff Davidson's confident posture crumbled. Agent Morrison's expression sharpened with interest. Ms. Carter, I'd like to review that footage. So would I, Steele said, moving to stand beside Thomas. In fact, I think everyone here would be very interested in seeing exactly what happened. The balance of power had shifted in an instant. What had started as a potential arrest had become something else entirely, a reckoning. The cameras had captured everything. The unprovoked attack, Denise's intervention, the officer's threats. Denise, Thomas said, turning back toward her. Would you be willing to show us that footage? She looked around at the sea of faces watching her. Bikers, cops, federal agents, reporters. Her quiet life was already over. There was no going back to the way things were. But maybe, just maybe, she could help ensure that justice was served. Yes, she said clearly. I'll show you the footage. As they moved toward the diner, Phoenix fell in a step beside her. You know, she said quietly, you're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the craziest. Denise managed a weak smile. Right now, I'm not sure there's a difference. But as they approached the diner's entrance, with Thomas walking protectively beside her and 60 bikers forming an honor guard around them, Denise realized something important. For the first time since Jerome's death, she didn't feel alone. She felt like she belonged to something bigger than herself, something that might just be worth fighting for. The question was, would she survive long enough to find out what that something was? The diner felt impossibly small with Agent Morrison, Sheriff Davidson, Steele, Phoenix, Thomas, and Denise crowded around the ancient security monitor in the back office. The black and white footage was grainy, but it was clear enough to destroy lives. Denise's hands trembled as she rewound the digital recording to 9:47 p.m., just 2 hours ago, though it felt like a lifetime. On the screen, Thomas's massive Harley pulled into the parking lot, parked neatly between the lines. He dismounted, stretched his back, and walked toward the diner's entrance with the casual gait of a man who had no idea his world was about to explode. "There," Thomas said quietly, pointing at the timestamp. 9:48. "I order a large black coffee and a slice of apple pie." On screen, he emerged from the diner 3 minutes later, coffee cup in hand, moving toward his bike. That's when the patrol car appeared, sliding into the lot with its headlights off. "Why no lights?" Agent Morrison asked Sheriff Davidson. Davidson's face was stone. "Standard patrol procedure." "Bullshit," Steele muttered. The footage showed Officers Reynolds and Martinez approaching Thomas, who set down his coffee cup and raised his hands in a non-threatening gesture. Even without audio, his body language was clearly cooperative. Then Reynolds said something that made Thomas step backward, shaking his head. "What did he say to you?" Denise asked. Thomas's jaw tightened. "He told me that my kind wasn't welcome in this town. Said I had 60 seconds to get on my bike and disappear, or they'd find a reason to arrest me." On screen, Thomas was backing toward his bike when Martinez suddenly grabbed his arm. Thomas pulled away, not aggressively, just trying to create space, and that's when Reynolds struck him with the baton for the first time. "Jesus Christ," Agent Morrison breathed. The beating that followed was systematic and brutal. Thomas tried to protect himself, tried to de-escalate, but the two officers were relentless. When he finally went down, they didn't stop. They kept hitting him, kept kicking him, until Denise appeared on screen like an avenging angel. "Stop the tape," Sheriff Davidson said hoarsely. "No," Steele said firmly. "Let play." They watched Denise step between the officers and Thomas, watched her refuse to back down, even when threatened. They watched her kneel beside Thomas, watched her show more courage in 5 minutes than most people displayed in a lifetime. When the footage ended, the silence in the small office was deafening. Agent Morrison turned to Sheriff Davidson. "Sheriff, I think we need to have a very serious conversation about your officer's conduct." But Davidson was staring at the screen with an expression Denise couldn't read. "There's something you all need to know," he said finally. "Something that changes everything." Steele's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Davidson looked directly at Thomas. "Mr. Corleone, 3 weeks ago, we received a federal directive to monitor your activities. We were told you were under investigation for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy." The words hit the room like a bomb. Thomas went rigid, his face draining of color. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Agent Morrison's voice was sharp with interest. "Mr. Corleone, perhaps you'd like to explain your recent financial activities?" "My financial activities?" Thomas's voice rose. "I design custom motorcycles. I pay my taxes. What the hell are you talking about?" Phoenix moved protectively closer to Thomas. "This is bullshit, and you know it." But Agent Morrison was studying Thomas with the intensity of a predator who'd just spotted prey. "Mr. Corleone, in the past 6 months, your business accounts have received over $2 million in payment from offshore companies. Companies with ties to known criminal organizations." The revelation hit Denise like a physical blow. $2 million? Offshore companies? She looked at Thomas, searching his face for some sign that this was all a mistake, some indication that the man she'd risked everything to protect wasn't actually a criminal. "That's impossible," Thomas said again, but his voice lacked conviction. "I mean, yes, I've had some big contracts lately, but offshore companies? Criminal organizations? I don't know anything about that." Steele's expression had gone cold and calculating. "Tommy, what contracts?" Thomas ran his hands through his hair, wincing as the movement aggravated his injuries. There was the contract with Meridian Industries. They wanted 50 custom bikes for some kind of corporate retreat, and the deal with Pacific Holdings for those vintage restorations. But I never dealt with anyone directly. Everything went through my business manager. Your business manager? Agent Morrison leaned forward. And who would that be? Vincent Torino. He's handled my books for 3 years. He's the one who brought me these big contracts. Said he had connections in the corporate world who appreciated quality work. The name hit Steele like a lightning bolt. His face went white, then red with rage. Vincent Torino? Tommy, please tell me you're not talking about Vinny Torino from Chicago. You know him? Thomas asked. Know him? Steele's voice was deadly quiet. Tommy, Vincent Torino is a money launderer for the Chicago mob. He's been using legitimate businesses to clean dirty money for 20 years. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Thomas wasn't a criminal. He was a patsy. Someone had been using his legitimate business, his reputation, his skills to launder money for organized crime. And he'd been too trusting, too focused on his craft, to realize what was happening. Oh God, Thomas whispered. The contracts, the payments. I never questioned them because the work was legitimate. I built those bikes, I delivered them. I thought I was just finally getting the recognition I deserved. Denise felt her heart break for him. She could see the devastation in his eyes, the realization that his success had been built on a lie, that he'd been manipulated and used by people he'd trusted. Mr. Corleone, Agent Morrison said, his tone slightly softer, if what you're saying is true, then you're not our target. You're a victim, but you're also our best chance of bringing down a major money laundering operation. What does that mean? Denise asked. Morrison turned to her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. It means, Ms. Carter, that Mr. Corleone is now a federal witness in a major organized crime investigation, and that makes him, and anyone associated with him, a target. The implications crashed over Denise like a tidal wave. By helping Thomas, by standing up to those cops, by getting involved in his life, she'd painted a target on her own back. The Chicago mob didn't leave loose ends, and they certainly didn't tolerate witnesses. How big a target? Steele asked grimly. Morrison's expression was grave. Vincent Torino works for the Castellano family. They've killed federal witnesses before. If they think Mr. Corleone can identify them, if they think he can testify against them, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood the implications. Phoenix moved closer to Denise, her voice gentle but urgent. Honey, you need to understand what this means. You're not safe here anymore. None of us are. Thomas turned to Denise, his eyes filled with anguish. I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to get involved in this. I never meant for any of this to happen. But Denise was thinking about something else, something that made her stomach churn with fear and anger. The cops, she said slowly, Reynolds and Martinez. They didn't just randomly decide to beat you up, did they? Agent Morrison's expression darkened. What are you thinking, Miss Carter? I'm thinking that if Vincent Torino wanted Thomas dead, if he wanted to eliminate a witness before Thomas even knew he was a witness, what better way than to have him killed by dirty cops? Make it look like police brutality, like a tragic accident. The silence that followed was deafening. Sheriff Davidson's face had gone ashen, and he was staring at the security monitor like it held the secrets of the universe. Sheriff, Steele said quietly, I think you better tell us exactly who gave you that federal directive about monitoring Tommy. Davidson's voice was barely a whisper. It came through Vincent Torino's law firm. They said they were working with federal authorities, that it was a joint task force operation. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Vincent Torino hadn't just been laundering money through Thomas's business. He'd been setting Thomas up to be murdered by corrupt cops, eliminating the one person who could connect him to the money laundering operation. And Denise had accidentally saved the life of the most important witness in a federal organized crime investigation. Well, Phoenix said dryly, this just got a whole lot more complicated. Thomas reached for Denise's hand, his touch warm and reassuring despite everything. Denise, I need you to know something. Whatever happens next, whatever we're facing, I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. I promise. Looking into his eyes, seeing the determination and the growing affection there, Denise realized that somewhere in the chaos of the last few hours, something had changed between them. What had started as a simple act of kindness had become something deeper, more complex. She was falling for Thomas Corleone, and he was falling for her. But they were also both marked for death by one of the most dangerous crime families in the country. Outside, the rumble of more motorcycles announced the arrival of additional chapters. The parking lot was about to become even more crowded, and the stakes were about to get even higher. "Agent Morrison," Denise said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "What happens now?" Morrison's smile was grim. "Now, Ms. Carter, we find out just how much courage you really have. Because this story is far from over." The call came at 3:17 a.m. Denise jolted awake in the small apartment above her diner, her heart hammering as her phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand. Through her window, she could see the glow of motorcycle headlights. The bikers had maintained their vigil all night, forming a protective perimeter around her property. But something was wrong. She could feel in the air like electricity before a storm. "Denise." Thomas's voice was tight with controlled panic. "You need to get dressed and get downstairs. Now." She was already reaching for her clothes. "What's happening?" "Vincent Torino is dead." The words hit her like ice water. She fumbled with her jeans, nearly dropping the phone. "Dead? How?" "Car bomb in Chicago, 2 hours ago. The feds think it was the Castellano family cleaning house." Thomas's voice was grim. "Denise, if they killed Torino to keep him quiet, that means they know about the investigation. And they know about me." Denise's hand shook as she pulled on her sweater. "What does that mean for us?" "It means we're running out of time." She made it downstairs in record time, finding the diner transformed into a command center. Steele had maps spread across one of the tables. Phoenix was monitoring multiple phones, and Agent Morrison was huddled with several other federal agents who had arrived during the night. The atmosphere was tense, urgent, like a war room preparing for battle. Thomas met her at the bottom of the stairs, and despite everything, her heart skipped at the sight of him. Someone had cleaned his wounds and given him fresh clothes, but she could still see the pain in his eyes. Not just physical pain, but the deeper ache of betrayal and fear. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. Before Thomas could answer, Agent Morrison approached them, his expression grave. "Ms. Carter, we need to discuss your options." "My options?" "The Castellano family has put a contract out on Mr. Corleone. $500,000 for his death. Another $250,000 for anyone who helped him. That includes you." The number was so large, so surreal, that Denise almost laughed. $750,000 for helping someone who was being beaten up. For interfering with their plan to eliminate a federal witness, Morrison corrected. "Ms. Carter, these people don't make idle threats. They have resources, connections, and a very long reach." Steele looked up from his maps. "How long do we have?" "Professional hitters could be here by dawn," Morrison replied. "Maybe sooner." Phoenix ended her phone call and turned toward them, her face pale. "I just talked to our contacts in Chicago. Word on the street is that the Castellanos have hired the Kozlov brothers." The name meant nothing to Denise, but she saw Thomas and Steele exchange looks of pure dread. "Who are the Kozlov brothers?" she asked. "Russian contract killers," Thomas said quietly. "They specialize in making deaths look accidental. Car crashes, house fires, random violence. They're very good at what they do." Denise felt the walls closing in around her. 12 hours ago, she'd been washing dishes and planning to watch late-night television. Now she was the target of professional assassins with a $750,000 bounty on her head. "So what are my options?" she asked Morrison. "Witness protection," he said immediately. "We can have you relocated within 6 hours. New identity, new life, complete separation from everything and everyone you've ever known." The words hit her like a physical blow. Leave everything behind? Her diner, her life, the community she'd built over 8 years? Start over again as a completely different person? "What about Thomas?" she asked. Morrison's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Corleone would be relocated separately. For security reasons, witnesses in the same case are never placed together." Denise felt something break inside her chest. She looked at Thomas, saw the same pain reflected in his eyes. They'd found each other in the midst of chaos, had discovered something real and precious and worth fighting for. And now they were being told they'd have to give it up, that they'd never see each other again. "There has to be another way," she said desperately. "There is," Steele said quietly. "But you're not going to like it." All eyes turned to him. Steele's expression was harder than she'd ever seen it, his blue eyes cold as winter steel. "We fight," he said simply. "We make a stand here, and we end this." Agent Morrison shook his head immediately. "Absolutely not. That would be suicide." "Would it?" Steele stood up, his full height impressive even in the small diner. "We've got over 100 riders here now, more arriving every hour. We know this terrain, we know these people, and we've got something the Kozlovs don't expect, a community that's willing to fight for what's right." Phoenix nodded slowly. "The whole town's been talking about what happened, about how Denise stood up to those cops, how she risked everything for a stranger. People are angry, Steele. They want to help." "It's too dangerous," Morrison insisted. "These aren't street thugs we're dealing with. The Kozlov brothers are professionals." "So are we," Steele replied. "Agent Morrison, with all due respect, your witness protection program has a 40% failure rate. 40% of the people you relocate are eventually found and killed anyway. At least this way, we're fighting on our own terms." Thomas moved closer to Denise, his presence both comforting and heartbreaking. "It's your choice," he said softly. "Whatever you decide, I'll support it." Denise looked around the diner. Her diner, the place where she'd rebuilt her life after Jerome's death, where she'd found purpose and community, and, finally, love. The thought of walking away from it all, of disappearing into witness protection and never seeing Thomas again, felt like dying. But the thought of staying and getting innocent people killed felt even worse. "How many people would be at risk if we stay and fight?" she asked Steele. His expression was honest, unflinching. "Everyone who chooses to stand with us. Could be dozens, could be hundreds. This is a small town, Denise. People talk, people care about each other. Word's already spread about what you did, about what's happening here." As if summoned by his words, the diner's front door chimed. Denise turned to see Mayor Patricia Kellerman entering, followed by Fire Chief Robert Torino, no relation to Vincent, despite the name, and a dozen other local residents. "Ms. Carter," Mayor Kellerman said, her voice firm with determination, "we need to talk." The mayor was a small woman in her 60s, but she carried herself with the authority of someone who'd been fighting battles her entire life. "The whole town knows what's happening here. We know about the threats, about the danger you're facing." "Mayor Kellerman," Agent Morrison began, "this is a federal matter. This is our town." The mayor interrupted. "And Denise Carter is one of ours. She's fed our families, employed our kids, been there for us when we needed her. Now she needs us." Fire Chief Torino stepped forward. "We've got 30 volunteer firefighters ready to help. The VFW has another 20 veterans. The high school football team wants to help too, though we told them absolutely not." Denise felt tears burning her eyes. These people, her neighbors, her customers, her friends, were willing to risk their lives for her. "You don't understand," she said desperately. "These are professional killers. People could die. People die anyway," Mayor Kellerman said simply. "But sometimes you get to choose what you die for. And protecting someone who stood up for what's right, that's worth dying for." The room fell silent except for the distant rumble of motorcycle engines and the soft hum of the coffee maker. Denise felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her like a physical force. Run and live in hiding forever, or stay and fight with the knowledge that people she cared about might die because of her choice. Thomas took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "Whatever you decide," he said again, "I'm with you." She looked into his eyes and saw her own feelings reflected there. Love, fear, determination, and something else. Hope. Despite everything they were facing, despite the impossible odds, there was still hope. "Agent Morrison," she said finally, "how long do we have before the Kozlov brothers arrive?" Morrison checked his watch. "Best case scenario, for hours." Denise nodded slowly, her decision crystallizing like ice forming on a winter pond. "Then we better get ready." Steele's smile was sharp and dangerous. "Now you're talking." But as the room erupted into planning and preparation, as maps were spread and weapons were discussed and defensive positions were planned, Denise couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just signed death warrants for everyone she cared about, including the man she was falling in love with. The darkest hour was coming, and she wasn't sure any of them would survive to see the dawn. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and the rumble of thunder mixed with the sound of approaching motorcycles. The final battle was about to begin. Dawn broke gray and threatening over Millbrook, Indiana, painting the sky the color of gunmetal. Denise stood at the diner's front window, watching the most extraordinary sight she'd ever seen unfold in her quiet town. The parking lot had become a fortress. Over 150 motorcycles now formed concentric circles around Carter's diner, their riders positioned with military precision. But it wasn't just bikers anymore. The volunteer firefighters had arrived with their trucks, creating a secondary perimeter. Veterans from 3 counties had shown up with hunting rifles and grim determination. Even some of the local police, the honest ones who'd been horrified by Reynolds and Martinez's actions, had quietly joined the defensive line. Denise. Thomas appeared beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. Despite the sleepless night and the approaching danger, he looked more at peace than she'd seen him since this all began. "How are you holding up?" She accepted the coffee gratefully, her fingers brushing his as she took the cup. The simple contact sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the hot beverage. "I keep thinking I should be more scared. And you're not." She considered the question seriously. "I am scared. Terrified, actually. But I don't know how to explain it. For the first time since Jerome died, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Thomas's smile was soft and genuine. "I know exactly what you mean." Their moment was interrupted by Steele's voice from across the diner. "Heads up, people. We've got movement on the highway." Everyone turned toward the windows. In the distance, a black sedan was approaching slowly, deliberately. It stopped about a quarter mile from the diner, just visible through the morning mist. Agent Morrison lowered his binoculars. "That's them. The Kozlov brothers. Phoenix checker weapon. A pistol that looked like it had seen serious use. Just the 2 of them. They don't need more," Morrison replied grimly. "Dmitry and Alexei Kozlov have killed over 30 people between them. They're patient, methodical, and they never leave witnesses." Steele keyed his radio. "All units, maintain positions. Nobody moves unless I give the word." The black sedan sat motionless on the highway for long minutes, its occupants presumably studying the defensive positions, calculating odds, planning their approach. The tension in the diner was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then something unexpected happened. Another vehicle appeared on the highway, a pickup truck flying an American flag. Then another, and another. Within minutes, a convoy of civilian vehicles was approaching from the opposite direction, their occupants clearly local residents. "What the hell?" Steele muttered. Mayor Kellerman's voice crackled over the radio they'd given her. "Steele, this is Patricia. We've got about 50 more volunteers incoming." Word spread to the neighboring towns. People were driving in from as far as Indianapolis. Denise felt her heart swell with emotion. These weren't just her neighbors anymore. These were complete strangers who had heard about what was happening and decided to help. People who believed that sometimes you had to stand up for what was right, regardless of the cost. "This is getting out of hand," Agent Morrison said, but there was admiration in his voice. "I've never seen anything like this." The civilian convoy parked along the highway, their occupants taking positions behind their vehicles. The Kozlov brothers' sedan was now surrounded by over 200 people, all of them armed, all of them determined to protect a woman they might not even know. Thomas moved closer to Denise, his voice low and urgent. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said hours ago." She turned to face him fully, seeing something in his eyes that made her heart race. "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "I know it's crazy. I know we've only known each other for 12 hours, but I've never felt anything like this before. And if we don't make it through today, I needed you to know." The words hit her like a physical force, confirming what she'd been feeling but hadn't dared to acknowledge. "Thomas, I know it's too fast. I know it doesn't make sense. I love you too," she interrupted, the words coming out in a rush. "I've been trying to tell myself it was just adrenaline, just the intensity of the situation, but it's not. It's real." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses from years of mechanical work. "Then we're going to get through this. We're going to survive, and we're going to have a chance to see where this goes." Before she could respond, Steele's voice cut through the moment. Movement in the sedan. "They're getting out." Everyone turned back to the windows. 2 men had emerged from the black car, tall, lean, dressed in dark clothing that seemed to absorb the morning light. Even from a distance, there was something predatory about the way they moved, something that made Denise's skin crawl. Dmitry and Alexei Kozlov, Morrison confirmed. They're assessing the situation. The brothers stood beside their car for several minutes, clearly surprised by the scale of the opposition they faced. This wasn't what they'd expected. A simple hit on a small-town diner owner had become a siege involving hundreds of armed civilians. Then one of them, Dmitry, according to Morrison, pulled out a cell phone and made a call. "Who's he calling?" Phoenix asked. Morrison's expression darkened. "Probably his employers. The Castellano family is going to want to know why a simple assassination has turned into a small-scale war." The call lasted several minutes. When it ended, both brothers got back into their sedan and drove away. The silence that followed was deafening. "Did they just leave?" Denise asked, hardly daring to believe it. "For now," Steele said cautiously. "But they'll be back. This isn't over." Agent Morrison was already on his phone, speaking rapidly to someone at the FBI. When he finished, his expression was troubled. "My superiors want to know what the hell is happening here. Apparently, this story has gone national. CNN, Fox News, every major network is sending crews." As if summoned by his words, news vans began appearing on the horizon. Within an hour, the quiet country road had become a media circus, with reporters and camera crews setting up along the highway. "Great," Thomas muttered. "Now we're a sideshow." But Denise was thinking about something else. "The media attention," she said slowly. "That changes things, doesn't it?" Morrison nodded. "The Kozlov brothers operate in shadows. They don't like publicity, don't like witnesses. With this much media coverage, killing you becomes much more complicated." Steele's radio crackled with an incoming message. He listened intently, then looked up with an expression of amazement. "That was our contact in Chicago. The Castellano family just withdrew the contract." "What?" Thomas and Denise said simultaneously. "Apparently, the media attention has made this too hot to handle. They're cutting their losses and disappearing back into whatever hole they crawled out of." The relief that washed over Denise was so intense it made her knees weak. Thomas caught her as she swayed, pulling her against his chest. "It's over," she whispered. "It's over," he confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. But even as the immediate danger passed, even as the crowd outside began to celebrate, Denise realized that something fundamental had changed. The quiet life she'd built in Millbrook was gone forever. The media attention, the story of the small-town diner owner who'd stood up to corruption and organized crime, would follow her for the rest of her life. "What happens now?" she asked Thomas. He looked around the diner, at Steele and Phoenix, who'd become like family, at Agent Morrison, who'd risked his career to protect them, at the hundreds of people outside who'd been willing to die for a stranger's principles. "Now," he said, "we figure out how to build a life together. If you want to, that is." Denise looked into his eyes and saw her future reflected there. Uncertain, complicated, but filled with love and possibility. "Yes," she said simply. "I want to." Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds, painting the world in gold and hope. The darkest hour had passed, and the dawn of something new was beginning. But first, they had to survive the media circus that was about to descend on their small town. And that, Denise realized with a mixture of dread and anticipation, might be the biggest challenge yet. 3 hours later, Carter's Diner had become the epicenter of a media storm that stretched from coast to coast. News vans lined the highway like a mechanical army, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metallic flowers. Reporters jockeyed for position, their cameras capturing every angle of the most unlikely fortress in American history. But inside the diner, Denise Carter was about to face her greatest challenge yet. "Ms. Carter," the CNN reporter said, her perfectly styled hair unmoved by the October wind, "the entire country is calling you a hero. How does it feel to know that your actions have exposed police corruption and brought down a major organized crime operation?" Denise sat at her usual table, the one by the window where she'd watched Thomas get beaten just 18 hours ago, and try to find words for something that felt impossible to explain. Thomas sat beside her, his presence steady and reassuring, while Steele and Phoenix flanked them like protective guardians. "I don't feel like a hero," Denise said honestly. "I just saw someone getting hurt, and I couldn't stand by and watch it happen." "But surely you knew the risks," The reporter pressed. You knew that interfering with police officers could have serious consequences. Denise thought about Jerome, about the night he died in police custody, about all the times she'd wished someone, anyone, had been brave enough to speak up for him. Sometimes, she said quietly, the consequences of doing nothing are worse than the consequences of doing something. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, with similar questions from reporters representing every major network. Each time, Denise gave the same honest, straightforward answers that had made her a folk hero to millions of Americans who were tired of corruption, tired of injustice, tired of feeling powerless. When the last reporter finally left, Denise slumped back in her chair, emotionally drained. You did great, Thomas said, taking her hand. You were honest, authentic. People are going to connect with that. Agent Morrison approached their table, his expression more relaxed than she'd seen it since this whole ordeal began. Ms. Carter, I wanted to let you know that the investigation into Officers Reynolds and Martinez is moving forward. The security footage you provided, combined with Thomas's testimony, should be enough to secure convictions. What about the corruption charges? Steele asked. Sheriff Davidson is cooperating fully. It turns out Vincent Torino had been paying him and several other local officials for years to look the other way on various activities. The whole network is unraveling. Phoenix leaned back in her chair. And the Castellano family? Morrison's smile was grim. Let's just say that the media attention has made their lives very complicated. When organized crime operations become front-page news, it tends to interfere with business. As if summoned by their conversation, Morrison's phone rang. He answered it, listened intently, then hung up with an expression of amazement. What is it? Denise asked. That was my supervisor in Washington. The Attorney General wants to meet with you, Ms. Carter. They're talking about using your story as the centerpiece of a new initiative to combat police corruption and organized crime. The magnitude of what was happening hit Denise like a tidal wave. Her simple act of courage had become something much larger, much more significant. She was being offered a platform to make real change, to ensure that what happened to Jerome, and what almost happened to Thomas, wouldn't happen to others. What would that involve, she asked. Speaking engagements, congressional testimony, working with law enforcement agencies to develop new protocols. You'd become the public face of police reform. Denise looked around her diner, the place where she'd rebuilt her life, where she'd found love, where she'd discovered reserves of courage she never knew she possessed. The thought of leaving it all behind to become some kind of national spokesperson felt overwhelming. I need time to think about it, she said. Morrison nodded. Of course. But Ms. Carter, you should know that you have the power to change things. Real change. The kind that saves lives. After Morrison left, the diner fell quiet except for the distant hum of news crews packing up their equipment. The immediate crisis was over, but Denise realized that her life would never be the same. Penny for your thoughts, Thomas said softly. She turned to look at him. This man who'd entered her life as a stranger and become something precious in the span of a single day. I'm thinking about choices, she said, about the path that led us here and the paths that lead away from here. And what are you thinking about those paths? Before she could answer, the diner's front door chimed. Denise looked up to see Mayor Kellerman entering, followed by Fire Chief Torino and a dozen other local residents. But these weren't the same people who'd arrived that morning ready for battle. These were her neighbors, her friends, her community. Denise, Mayor Kellerman said, we want to talk to you before you make any decisions about your future. What do you mean? The mayor smiled. Honey, we know you're going to get offers. Book deals, movie rights, speaking engagements. The whole world wants a piece of Denise Carter right now. Fire Chief Torino stepped forward. But we want you to know that whatever you decide, you'll always have a home here. This community, this place, it's part of you now, just like you're part of it. Denise felt tears burning her eyes. I don't want to leave, she said. This is my home. You're my family. Then don't leave, Thomas said simply. Whatever opportunities come your way, whatever platforms you're offered, you can do it all from right here. This diner, this community, it's already proven it can change the world. Steele nodded. Tommy's right. You don't need to go to Washington to make a difference. You've already made a difference. Right here, right now. Phoenix grinned. Besides, where else are we going to get decent coffee and apple pie? The laughter that followed felt like a release, like the final breaking of the tension that had held them all captive for the past day. Denise looked around at the faces surrounding her, bikers and firefighters, veterans and neighbors, federal agents and small-town officials, and realized that she'd found something she'd been searching for her entire life. She'd found her tribe. "You know what?" she said, standing up and moving toward the coffee pot. "I think I'll stay right here. But I'll use whatever platform I'm given to make sure this story reaches people who need to hear it." Thomas stood and moved to her side. "We'll use whatever platform we're given," he corrected gently. She looked up at him, seeing the love and determination in his eyes. If you'll have me," he said. "I'm thinking about relocating my business to Millbrook. This town could use a good motorcycle mechanic, and I could use a good woman to keep me grounded." "Is that a proposal?" Phoenix called out, grinning. Thomas's face reddened, but he didn't back down. "Maybe it is. Denise Carter, would you be willing to take a chance on a reformed money launderer with a talent for building bikes and a tendency to attract trouble?" Denise set down the coffee pot and turned to face him fully. Around them, their friends and family, because that's what they'd become, watched with anticipation. "Thomas Corleone," she said, "I've been taking chances on people my whole life. But you're the first one who's ever taken a chance on me." She stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, right there in front of everyone, sealing a promise that had been building since the moment she'd stepped between him and those batons. The cheer that went up from the assembled crowd was loud enough to rattle the windows. Outside, a few remaining news crews caught the moment on camera, ensuring that the love story born from courage and chaos would become part of the legend. As the celebration continued around them, as plans were made and futures were discussed, Denise realized that sometimes the most extraordinary things grow from the simplest acts of human decency. She'd stood up for a stranger, and in doing so, she'd found her soulmate. She'd risked everything for what was right, and in return, she'd gained everything she'd ever wanted. The story that had begun with violence and fear was ending with love and hope. And in a small diner in Millbrook, Indiana, surrounded by the most unlikely family imaginable, Denise Carter finally understood what it meant to be truly home. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Carter's diner, illuminating a scene that would have been impossible to imagine just half a year ago. The walls were covered with framed newspaper articles, photographs from congressional hearings, and letters from people across the country who'd been inspired by Denise's story. But more importantly, they were covered with pictures of the extended family that had grown around this small Indiana diner. Denise stood behind the counter, pouring coffee for the morning regulars, her engagement ring catching the light as she moved. The diamond wasn't large. Thomas had insisted on something practical, something that wouldn't get in the way of her work. But it was perfect, just like everything else in her life had become. "Order up," Thomas called from the kitchen, sliding a plate of his famous motorcycle-shaped pancakes across the pass. He'd taken over most of the cooking duties, claiming that his engineering background made him naturally suited to the precise science of breakfast preparation. Denise suspected he just enjoyed being able to take care of her the way she'd taken care of him that first night. The diner was busier than it had ever been. The media attention had brought tourists from across the country, all wanting to see the place where an ordinary woman had done something extraordinary. But the regulars still came too. The truckers and factory workers, the teenagers and elderly folks who'd made Carter's Diner their second home long before it became famous. Steele pushed through the front door, the bell chiming his arrival. He'd become a daily fixture, usually arriving around 8 a.m. for coffee and whatever gossip Denise had picked up from the morning news shows. The Hells Angels had officially adopted Carter's Diner as their unofficial headquarters, and the parking lot still regularly filled with motorcycles, though now they shared space with tour buses and rental cars. "Morning, boss lady," Steele said, settling onto his usual stool at the counter. "You see the news this morning?" Denise poured his coffee without being asked. Black, no sugar, strong enough to wake the dead. "Which news? The story about the police reform bill passing the House, or the one about Vincent Torino's associates getting sentenced?" "Both," Steele grinned. "But I was talking about the piece in USA Today. They're calling you one of the most influential Americans of the year." Phoenix emerged from the back office, where she'd been helping Denise manage the flood of interview requests and speaking engagement offers. She'd officially become the diner's business manager, claiming that someone needed to protect Denise from being exploited by the media circus. "Don't let it go to her head," Phoenix said, but she was smiling. "We've got 3 more documentary crews wanting to film here next month, and someone from Hollywood called about movie rights." "I told you," Denise said, refilling the coffee pot. "I'm not interested in Hollywood. This story belongs to all of us, not just me." The front door chimed again, and Agent Morrison entered. He'd become a regular visitor too, partly for official business. Denise's testimony had been crucial in several ongoing investigations, but mostly because he'd developed a genuine friendship with the unlikely family that had formed around the diner. "Morning, everyone," Morrison said, accepting the cup of coffee Denise automatically poured for him. "I've got news." "Good news or bad news?" Thomas asked, emerging from the kitchen with flour on his apron. "Good news. The Justice Department just announced that the Carter Initiative, the police reform program based on your story, is being implemented in 12 major cities. They're crediting your congressional testimony as the catalyst that made it possible." Denise felt the familiar mix of pride and humility that came with these updates. Her simple act of courage had rippled outward in ways she never could have imagined, creating real change in communities across the country. "There's more," Morrison continued. "The Attorney General wants to know if you'd be interested in serving on a National Advisory Committee for Police Community Relations." Before Denise could answer, the door chimed again. This time it was Mayor Kellerman, Fire Chief Torino, and several other local officials. They'd called an impromptu town meeting to discuss something they claimed was important for the community's future. "Denise," Mayor Kellerman said, "we've been talking, and we have a proposal for you." "What kind of proposal?" The mayor smiled. "We want to officially rename this stretch of highway Carter's Way, and we want to establish an annual festival, the Courage Days celebration, to honor what happened here and to raise money for police reform initiatives." Denise felt tears prick her eyes. 6 months ago, she'd been a widow running a small diner, trying to rebuild her life in quiet anonymity. Now she was being honored by her community. Her story was inspiring national legislation, and she was surrounded by people who'd become family. "I don't know what to say," she managed. "Say yes," Thomas said, moving to stand beside her. "Say yes to all of it. The advisory committee, the festival, the highway naming. You've earned the right to see your impact celebrated." Steele raised his coffee cup. "To Denise Carter," he said loudly enough for the entire diner to hear. "The woman who proved that one person really can change the world." The toast was taken up by everyone in the diner, regulars and tourists, bikers and federal agents, local officials, and visiting reporters. As the voices joined together in celebration, Denise felt overwhelmed by the love and support surrounding her. But the best moment came later, after the crowds had dispersed and the diner had closed for the day. Denise and Thomas sat on the front steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The parking lot was quiet except for a few motorcycles belonging to Steele and Phoenix, who'd stayed late to help with inventory. "Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked quietly, stepping into that parking lot that night. "Everything that came after." Denise considered the question seriously. Her life had become complicated in ways she never could have imagined. The media attention, the speaking engagements, the constant requests for interviews and appearances. It was overwhelming sometimes. But then she thought about the letters she received from people who'd been inspired to stand up for what was right. She thought about the police reforms that were being implemented because of her story. She thought about the love she'd found with Thomas, the family she'd gained with the bikers, the community that had rallied around her. "No," she said finally, "I don't regret any of it. Even the scary parts, even the parts that hurt. Because all of it led to this." Thomas took her hand, his thumb tracing over her engagement ring. "To what?" "To us. To this family we've built. To the knowledge that we can make a difference." She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. "To the understanding that sometimes the most important thing you can do is just show up for another human being." Speaking of showing up, Thomas said, "I have something for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package. Denise opened it to find a key, old brass, worn smooth by years of use. "What's this?" Thomas's smile was soft and nervous. "It's the key to my shop. I had it officially transferred to both our names today. I figured if we're going to build a life together, we should make it official in every way possible." Denise stared at the key, understanding the significance of the gesture. Thomas wasn't just offering her access to his business. He was offering her partnership in every aspect of his life. "Thomas Corleone," she said, "are you asking me to be your business partner as well as your wife?" "I'm asking you to be my everything," he said simply. "Partner, wife, best friend, fellow troublemaker. Whatever the future brings, I want to face it with you." Denise kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into the gesture. Around them, the small town of Millbrook settled into evening quiet, but she knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to make a difference. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman trying to rebuild her life after loss. Tonight, she was a woman who'd found her purpose, her love, and her place in the world. The story that had begun with violence and fear had become a tale of courage, love, and the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change. And in a small diner on a newly renamed stretch of highway in Indiana, surrounded by the most unlikely family imaginable, Denise Carter finally understood that sometimes the best stories don't end. They just begin new chapters. As the stars came out overhead and the motorcycles rumbled softly in the parking lot, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready for it. After all, she'd already proven that one person could change the world. Now she was ready to see what two people could do together. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments below what part resonated with you the most. Your support means everything to this channel, and I can't wait to share more amazing stories with you. Until next time, remember that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right despite the fear. Stay strong, stay kind, and I'll see you in the next story.